Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We're so delighted to have you. My name is Madison Mayhew, and I am the Policy and Advocacy Manager with Creation Justice Ministries. I see many of you doing this already, but I invite you to share your name, where you're joining us from, your pronouns, your congregation if you have an affiliation, or whatever feels comfortable to share in the chat. It's always nice to get a sense of who all is in the room. So thank you all for doing that already. This is our agenda for the evening. We'll briefly go over CJM's priorities so you have a top line view of what we're working on. We'll discuss outlets for advocacy, the strengths of faith communities and advocacy. We'll lean a little bit into the nitty-gritty details of setting up meetings and various roles to play, how to use media as a form of advocacy, and then hopefully we'll have some time to practice some of the content we've shared and end with questions. In terms of housekeeping, I will be doing a lot of talking this evening, so please bear with me. If you have a question, please feel free to share it in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor. But we will have time at the end to go through any remaining questions. So if I don't get to it, which knowing me, I may not because it's hard to multitask, so feel free to remind me at the end if I don't address it during the presentation. This presentation is also being recorded and will be shared with anyone who registered along with the slides, so you will have access to the content here. As we transition into a time of learning, we will begin with a land acknowledgement. But before we do that, I also want to take a moment to name just where we are as a country is really challenging. It's challenging emotionally, spiritually, and for some even physically. And I want to take a moment to honor, whatever you may be bringing into this space tonight, and remind us all that however you are showing up, that you are certainly welcome here. I also want to be realistic and name that there may be questions about how our democracy is functioning right now, and questions or concerns about how the advocacy landscape is changing. If you're sitting with those questions and concerns, you are certainly not alone. I certainly take solace in this gathering here and knowing that this country has been through challenging times before. And although we're navigating a different landscape than ever before, there's power in gathering together. And I hope that we may all be encouraged by each other's commitment to learn and show up together here. Now I invite you to read along with me as I share a land acknowledgement that comes from Vance Black Fox, an Indigenous leader in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We are gathered together in this virtual place from all parts of Turtle Island, connected by technology, faith, a common sense purpose, the breath given us by the breath maker, who has named and called us here, and the very piece of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We understand the importance and necessity of acknowledging the land and the original indigenous peoples whose creation stories are rooted in these places and have lived on these lands through Turtle Island since time immemorial. We also understand that all land is indigenous land, and I invite each of you to name in the chat, feature the indigenous peoples or tribal nations who were the first to love, pray, grow, celebrate, cry, drum, and sing upon the lands and places where you are located now. We know that Indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but part of our communities, churches, schools, and leadership, and that they offer invaluable wisdom for how we exist today and into the future in relationship with Mother Earth and our human and non-human neighbors. Thank you for reading that alongside me, and invite you. I see a few folks sharing in the chat already, but if you would consider sharing the Indigenous land where you occupy to honor those communities there. All right, let's jump in and we'll talk a little bit about CJM's priorities. Creation Justice Ministries works to protect creation justice, and what I see are three main buckets: ocean conservation, public lands conservation, and environmental justice. Sometimes there are connections between all three, or overlaps and connections between two. An example that I think of often is the mining proposal in Oak Flat, Arizona, on a which is sacred land for the Western Apache peoples. It's an international mining project that would decimate these sacred lands while causing significant harms to their ways of life, not only threatening these cultural significance, but also threatening nearby waterways and harming precious ecosystems that keep the land healthy. Another example is offshore drilling and deep sea mining. The latter we know less about, but know enough to confidently say that expanding deep sea mining could have horrible consequences for marine life and likely cause a ripple effect of harm for those communities who rely on healthy oceans. The last example I'll share for now is around administrative policy. We are actively tracking and getting involved with regulatory proposals that would harm public health and expand extractive industries. Now, because this is a 101, we will be covering some basics. It never hurts to have a little bit of a refresher. But when we are talking about federal advocacy in this space, we'll be focusing on congressional action and administrative action. When it comes to Congress, their main function is making laws, controlling government funding, which, as we've seen in the past weeks, if not years, has been a bit of a mess, approving nominations such as federal judges, including the Supreme Court, but also lower court judges, and other administrative positions, and overseeing the executive branch. Every person, excluding U.S. territories and the District of Columbia, has one representative and two senators. And they ultimately represent you, and they have a responsibility to represent you in their work. When it comes to administrative advocacy, we are talking about the cabinet and federal agencies that are responsible for the day-to-day enforcement and administration of federal laws. We typically mobilize in this space for public comment periods. These are typically open around new proposed regulatory rules, whether to establish new rules or change current existing rules. But there are other opportunities like requesting enforcement of existing regulations or potentially representing parties in administrative hearings by providing public testimony. When thinking about faith groups in advocacy, really want to name that faith communities play a really important role in advocacy at the federal level, especially right now as Christian nationalism is in such a spotlight. Many of the communities that we work with and those which you are members of represent communities that have a really strong theologically rooted and moral framework. When many of our climate allies are bringing in scientific evidence and research, which is so incredibly meaningful and valuable, faith communities bring a moral voice that is unique. You represent important constituencies and offer authentic and meaningful stories that really do matter. Faith communities also expand the imagination of what's possible. I've worked in the faith advocacy community for a long time, and some of my favorite lobby meetings have been with staffers who didn't even know this type of community existed and proceeded to have a really meaningful conversation about why people of faith care about protecting and stewarding the environment. And to lean into this a little bit more, there's research that shows that the practice of expanding what's possible and providing alternative pathways is a key part of resisting authoritarianism. In the years that I have been a part of faith-based advocacy and organizing, it's been really evident to me that faith communities are already leading an example by doing that. Whether it's providing mutual aid or installing clean energy as an alternative energy source or even establishing a community garden, faith communities are already teaching us what it looks like to care for our communities and what's possible when we love our neighbors in meaningful ways. And I think that's a unique role that faith communities can play in this particular moment. I also want to just take a minute to name and talk about the photos here on this slide. These were taken from a couple of years ago when I was in a different role a different organization preparing for the International Climate Conference that was happening in Azerbaijan. The broader interfaith, the broader national interfaith community planned a prayer vigil for the representatives of the State Department who would be leading the negotiations at the International Climate Conference, while we also delivered a petition to them urging them to take bold action during their negotiations. The man on the left in the top photo, his name is Trig Talley. And at the time, he's one of the main negotiators for the State Department on behalf of the United States. This past year in Belém, Brazil, at the International Climate Conference, some of our faith partners invited him to speak at an event and uh, that they were hosting during the conference. And while he was speaking, he shared that the prayer vigil we had planned the previous year was one of the most meaningful experiences he had ever had during his time at the State Department. And I was truly so deeply touched by that and offer that as a story, as an example of how the faith community can sometimes plant seeds that can linger and shape someone in an influential position in ways you never expected. And if you have your own story of how you've connected with faith with elected officials or people in influential positions of power, I'd love to invite you to share that in the chat so that we can learn from each other. Um, when talking about creation care and advocacy, there are a couple of guideposts that may be helpful. Each of our stories and connections are unique, but often share a same rooted framework. Here are two screenshots of resolutions that come from two CJM member communions and denominations that talk about why they care as a community to address climate change. And that they share a very similar language, and you'll see the same across other communions as well. But as when developing your own framework for talking about creation care, I have a set of reflection questions to consider to help build on and shape how to communicate your own connection. The first being, what is my personal and spiritual connection to creation care? Maybe you've experienced a climate disaster in your hometown or the community where you live. Maybe you're a scientist that has seen changes in your work, or maybe you're even a farmer or a backyard gardener that has witnessed changes in the soil health or your ability to grow certain produce. Maybe it's just that you have a really deep love for caring for creation. It's simple as that. It's all meaningful and valuable. The second question, what scripture, stories, or theological framework is compelling to you? How does it shape your own story of connection? Is there a novel that really resonates with you, or a professor of theology that has a certain framework? Is there poetry? I know Wendell Berry is a spiritual guide for a lot of folks in this space. What really resonates with you? And lastly, what does my faith tradition say about creation care? Are there policies or social statements that I can glean from that can help inform um, and build off of what we've explored already? Now we're going to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty, how to set up and prepare for advocacy meetings with your member of Congress. We'll talk a little bit about how to prepare various lobby meeting roles, getting to know your member, and ultimately maintaining that relationship. And I do want to set a reminder that, um, you know, lobby meetings or advocacy meetings, relationship building meetings don't have to take place in Washington, D.C. Your members have offices in district and staffers there that are happy to meet with you. And just a reminder that you don't have to travel all the way to DC to have these meaningful moments of interaction. So as we go through these steps, keep that in mind. Maybe plant a seed in for a conversation in the future of ways that you might be able to consider meeting with your member of Congress in where you live. We're Simplifying this process a little bit, just for those who may be super, super new to this, want to make sure that it's accessible for anyone who may be brand new. Um, this is a screenshot of one of my own senator's office pages. You'll see that I've clicked on a tab that says contact, which has led me to this page where I can email his office or put in a scheduling request. Typically, the scheduling request is for like a speaking engagement or to join a community event. And then an email is an opportunity to directly talk with the office about a particular issue. It could also include scheduling. And so just showing that here to give an example of what you might be engaging with. Every congressperson's website is different, and some even have specific spaces to request a meeting, but it should generally look something like this. And if you don't have a point of contact in the office, this really is a great place to start. But also, CJM has access to a database of staffer contact information. So if you are looking for a particular staffer contact, we are happy to provide that for you so that you can set up those meetings yourselves and also work with you in the process. When it comes to preparing for an advocacy meeting, it's really important that you do your research ahead of time. Do you know Explorer has the member spoken about the issue that you're meeting with? Do they have a leadership position, or are they do they sit on a particular committee that has jurisdiction on the issue that you want to talk about? Do they have a faith tradition? Sometimes maybe a surprise that they may be a member of a particular faith practice that is similar to your own, and how can you build those bridges? Really digging into some of these details can be helpful in terms of framing how to speak to your issue in these meetings. Secondly, preparing examples of district stories is such a meaningful way to talk about why you care about this particular issue. Maybe your congregation transitioned from fossil fuels to install clean energy and is now seeing a massive amount of savings from your energy bills. Or maybe you've seen an impact on your community's public health. Maybe you live near a polluted waterway that's impacting your communities. What is that personal connection that can really highlight our shared humanity in the stories that we tell? It's also important to make a plan and assign roles and think through an agenda. The member of Congress and their staffers have very full schedules, and we want to be respectful of their time. And we'll go over what some of those roles can look like in just a minute. And then lastly, what is the ask of your member or the staffer? Is it to support specific legislation, to speak out about a proposed administrative rule? Maybe it's to visit your community and do a community tour. Making a clear ask is really important to ensure that your message is communicated effectively. Here are some ways that folks may split up roles in an advocacy meeting. These are not necessarily must-dos, but helpful guides to make sure goals are met and time is used effectively. They also don't have to be held by different people. You don't have to have 5 people to attend an advocacy meeting. One person can certainly carry more than one role. And like I said, more of a guide, not necessarily, set in stone. Use them as you wish. I will say it is really helpful to have someone be a team lead. Just to help guide the meeting, make sure that folks are speaking when it's their turn to speak, and that there's, the flow runs smoothly. A storyteller can be really helpful in bringing some of those in-district stories while really using some of that faith-rooted language about creation care. Sometimes folks will use this role to offer a prayer for the meeting or the staffer. Just make sure that if you do offer a prayer, that you ask the staffer ahead of time if they are comfortable with receiving that prayer. And to make sure that there's a clear ask, like we talked about, identify ahead of time who's in charge of making that ask, and work on how to, wordsmith the messaging around that ask. A note taker make sure the conversation is properly recorded, especially if there are any next steps. I know a lot of times it's really easy. This happens to me on a day-to-day basis outside of meeting with members or staffers. You go to a meeting, you have a really great conversation, and you get back to your desk and you forget what your to-dos were. So writing them down is the best thing you can do to make sure that those are followed through on. And then, of course, a timekeeper, make sure that the meeting ends on time. If you're doing a series of meetings, it's helpful to make sure that you're able to get to the next meeting, but also just generally respectful of the office's time. Going back a bit to doing research on your member, here are a few other reminders to keep in mind as you do your research. Learning what is important to them and their district can help find connections for the work you may be already doing or an invitation for the member to explore themselves. These points of connection can also offer how the faith community can support their work. We talked a little bit about learning about their faith tradition, their priorities, and looking and even exploring their voting record. Um, some of our partners in the environmental space have resources that make that really easy. The League of Conservation Voters has a really great congressional scorecard that shows members' voting records on environmental policy, and it's really comprehensive. And so that's a really great resource to pull from. But congress.gov also tracks all of that information. But if you have any trouble of finding or figuring out where to find that, we can also be a resource for that. Um, but I think it's also valuable to say that even if they haven't been historically vocal about the environment or creation care policy, that there may be other connections to really lean into, whether it be around public health or economic benefits or maybe even international trade. We know that climate change is intersectional, and sometimes we have to help each other see where those connections are. So there is really an opportunity. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe always says that climate change impacts every issue that we care about. It's just a matter of finding the right connection to make that connection. All right. In terms of maintaining a relationship with your member of Congress, having a meeting with your member of Congress or a staffer is the first step, but we're really looking to maintain a relationship with them and be seen as a resource for them. We want to make sure that our connections have value. If there are any news stories about your community, consider sharing it with them. Do you have a mailing list or a newsletter? Consider adding them to it so they have a regular update as to what you're working on. Have they considered supporting strong creation care policy? Consider publicly thanking them on social media or in your own personal capacities. And lastly, consider inviting them to speak at an event or even offer a congregational tour. We know that sometimes advocacy can happen outside of the office, and social lobbying can be really impactful too. I think one-on-one moments or uh, experiences outside of the office can be really meaningful. I'm thinking a lot about congregational tours specifically when in the past couple of years around the fight to protect, first pass and then protect the Inflation Reduction Act clean energy tax credits. There's some work that congregations did to invite members of Congress to tour their buildings to see how beneficial energy upgrades were for their buildings and really urge them to protect those key tax credits so that other communities could benefit. Ultimately, we lost that fight, but it was a really effective way to build a relationship with that office, even if the member themselves didn't attend, but a key staffer did, or their legislative director, or their community engagement person. It doesn't necessarily have to be the member themselves, although that would be amazing. There are always other opportunities to connect with staff in the office to make sure that they are engaged in those opportunities as well. All right. Now we're going to talk a little bit about administrative advocacy. And we're going to be focusing on how to submit a public comment. So in order to submit a public comment, we will be heading to the Federal Register website, which is a screenshot here. And I will say, to me, I'm I will be the first to say I don't always feel the most technologically savvy, but this website to me is not the easiest to navigate. So if you go here and you're a little bit confused, know that you're not alone. But I'll try to hopefully um, be a guide to make it easy so that if you do encounter it into the future, you can find the rules that you're looking for and the comment process is easy peasy. So we're looking at the Federal Register's website, and you'll see in the green block that says current issue, and on the left side, there's a link that says 12 proposed rules. So if you click on the proposed rules link, it'll take you to a list of proposed rules. Here is a screenshot of a random one I chose, not relevant to our work at all, just to give you an example of what it looks like. When you open the proposed rule, there should be a section that says submit public comment that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. It's in green. And you'll click that, which will take you to this page where there's an opportunity to submit a public comment right when in the box, but you can also upload a PDF. The most effective comments are the most personal. Um, there are a lot of opportunities to shape the comment as you wish. A lot of partners and even CJM will offer talking points about a particular proposed rule, but adding in that specific touch really does make it more meaningful. Um, I will say CJM also offers opportunity to sign on to petitions for regulatory actions. The petitions are uploaded as a joint comment, which are another way to submit public comment. Um, and so there are a couple of different avenues, and each particular public comment period for each rule has its own docket number. So you can always search by the docket number as well. I should also note here that comment periods can range usually between 30 to 90-day windows of time. However, we are seeing that the periods have shortened mostly to 30-day windows. So it's important to keep an eye on when those deadlines are. I should also say that with the current administration's attacks on regulations that protect our public health and the environment, I wouldn't blame you if you would be asking, why should I even bother? And I hear you. It can be hard not to feel like you're screaming into the void. However, because these comments are on public record, they can be used for lawsuits in the future. So even if it feels like our efforts in this moment feel insignificant, we're ultimately helping build momentum for future action. When using social media, it can also be a really great tool for advocacy and even building relationships with your members. Um, it can be a place to thank them for their support or hold them accountable in a public way. It can also be a tool for educating your communities about action opportunities or issues that are relevant to your work. This is also a really great place to practice how you talk about creation care, bringing in that faithful and moral voice in that framing that we talked about earlier. Like another important thing to remember that I'm reminded of, or I was recently reminded of, is that when you're engaging in social media and particularly with a member, it's important to name that you are a constituent. We know that social media can be pretty expansive, and tracking constituent voices can easily get lost if it's not specifically named. So keep that in mind, either if you're making your own content or engaging with your representatives or senators online. Keep that in your back pocket as you engage with your own messaging.
Hey everyone,
Ooh.
it's Avery.
I want to share a example from CJM that leans more into issue education and an advocacy opportunity to show you how social media can be used on issues that we care about. And hopefully you can hear the sound, and if not, we can skip it and come back to it. I can follow up. Oops, sorry about that.
Hey everyone, it's Avery, and here's what you need to know about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and why it's back in the news. The Arctic Refuge is one of the last truly wild places left in North America. It's home to musk oxen and porcupine and polar bears and caribou. And for the Gwich'in people, whose villages border the refuge, this is the sacred place where life began. For decades, the refuge has been at the center of a national tug of war between those who see it as a sacred place that needs to be protected and between those who want to drill it for oil. And right now, it's under a twofold attack. First, some members of Congress are trying to use the CRA, or the Congressional Review Act, to overturn common sense management from the Bureau of Land Management. If Congress succeeds in this work, it'll throw the whole area back into chaos and reopen it for oil drilling. Second, and at the same time, the Bureau of Land Management has opened nominations for a new round of oil and gas lease sales in the Arctic, sales that have failed in the past. But this move risks opening these lands and expanding fossil fuel development into these fragile habitats, threatening endangered species and threatening indigenous subsistence lifeways. These efforts could devastate one of the most spiritually and ecologically significant spaces in North America. If you want to help us in protecting these sacred lands, you can visit creationjustice.org/Alaska to find out how to take action.
All right. I know not everyone has the time or capacity to engage in this way. We are really lucky that we have a social media staff member who can make these really beautiful reels. But really just wanted to show another opportunity to consider in your own advocacy efforts. It could even also be sharing content that already exists or responding to content that you see. It doesn't have to be creating your own video, but just showing it as an example of ways to consider. Another tool for storytelling is using media. Similarly to what we've talked about before, using media can be a tool for building relationships through public thinking or accountability. The example on the right is a piece that Avery, who you just saw in the previous video, wrote about a repeal of an EPA rule and its impacts it would have for communities. He wrote it for Sojourners, which is a Christian-based magazine. Um, but similarly to social media, this can be a great place to practice your voice as a person of faith and your connection to creation care. Examples could be op-eds or letters to the editor, but also know that the media landscape is also changing, and maybe there are some non-traditional pathways to consider. Are there newsletters or a Substack that you could contribute to that has some traction? If you'd like to consider authoring a piece or you're thinking about it and want to talk a little bit about it more, CJM can be a resource and we would love to help support you in that. Um, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you this evening, and you may be wondering what your role is and what your next best step is. And although we've been talking about some specific logistics when it comes to advocacy, I'd like us to consider how we all bring something unique to the table that may look different than the traditional path. Here is a chart from Deepa Iyer, who maps out the various roles that exist in the movement for equity, liberation, justice, and solidarity. I share this here because want to remind us all that we have a unique role to play in this collective work together. A reminder that we don't have to carry it all, but together we can build and create something really meaningful, especially right now in the moment that we're in. I would encourage you to encourage her work a little bit more to get a better sense of her definitions. But for this moment, I invite you to take a minute to think about where you might fit in for your advocacy journey. I know that it's not a perfect fit for our conversation today, but I think really helps paint a picture of the various hats that each of us can hold. And just want to sit for a minute or two. And if you feel comfortable, I'd invite you to share in the chat where what's coming up for you. If it's helpful, I can, well, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but when I think about a storyteller, I think about someone that we were, in a lobby meeting, who's someone that can carry a story from a community that's either been impacted or someone that has implemented tools of resilience in the face of climate disaster or um, as someone who can carry the message of the community. I see a guide, experimenter, visionary, healer. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and I hope that you'll keep um, pondering your role in these circles here. But before we move on, I do want to take to briefly talk about power and its various expressions. We don't have a ton of time to go too deep on this, but wanted to share with you to get your wheels turning a little bit. We will share the slides after, so you'll have more time to sit with this if you'd like to. But I want to run through this before we jump into some discussion questions. Um, I think this, for those who don't know, I'm actually a social worker by training. More on the policy side, I don't have any clinical experience whatsoever, but I find definitions and maps like this really helpful to help kind of break down and think through how we engage with systems, how we engage with each other and our communities, and even with ourselves. So when we think about power over, this is typically what we think of and the typical experience of power. It's a one-way relationship. One side has power and acts in ways to maintain that power. Um, the example is an empire has control over their citizens or a parent's control over their children. Power two is power. Every person or group has the potential to make change. This can open up possibilities for individuals and groups to unite. And the example is a person refused to work under unsafe conditions, and a group organized a strike for fair wages. Power With is a group of people with a common goal who all support and work together to make it happen. So how does that common goal bring people together? The example is a student finds peers that have same grievances and they go to the principal together. Power Within is a person's belief in themselves to imagine that change can happen and seeing yourself as part of the solution. I think a lot of you here may resonate with this. Um, and thinking about how our interplay and dignity, how we show that to the world. Power four is recognizing that power impacts our world and it should move us to a more just society. And the example here is a group organizes to expand access to voting in Black and Brown communities. Obviously, kind of big picture here. I'm sure there are folks who could probably spend an entire semester breaking down all of these different forms of power, but wanted to use it as a spark as we think about how we show up in our communities, what power that we have, and what relationships exist that might get us to shift a little bit in our advocacy work together. So, thinking about your unique role and the power that you hold, here are some ideas of how to engage with your faith community. Obviously, um, so it's pretty wide ranging here. These are just examples. One could be organizing an issue briefing to talk about something that is relevant to your community or something that you care about. Maybe it's a letter writing campaign to get your member to co-sponsor a bill or to, let them know that your faith community really cares about this issue. Maybe it's scheduling an in-district meeting with your state delegation, meaning your representatives and senators. Um, Maybe I know some denominations have um, senior leadership in their denominational structure. Are there ways to engage folks that may have a higher influence in within your own denomination that would be worthwhile to engage in your advocacy efforts as you do outreach to members of Congress or to the administration? Is there some internal organizing that can be done in that regard? It could be as simple as using your church sign to share a message. And I know it may seem silly, but it feels like there's an invitation to use public facing elements to share what you care about and maybe as an invitation to welcome others into your space. Or maybe you organize a book club. Maybe you want to start with simple education in a really informal way to help people get their wheels turning and use that as a stepping stone into your advocacy journey. And I have one final thing I want to share with you all. It is a um, zine from a illustrator that I really love. Her name is Christine Tyler Hill, and she has taken the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, who is an amazing organizer and strategist around social justice issues, and she wrote a book called Emergent Strategies that's really lovely and would highly recommend it to anyone engaging in this space. Um, and I wanted to share these illustrations that Christine Tyler Hill did of Adrienne Marie Brown's work because it's really beautiful, but I think it helps kind of visualize what Adrienne Marie Brown's work, the some of the major themes. So I wanted to read that and end with this because I think it's been really impactful for me, and I hope it may be impactful for you as well. She writes, systemic change is fractal. Fractals appear in nature all around us at all scales. I really love the examples here of the tiny snowflakes to the mountains to trees and flowers. She writes, when it comes to changing the world, no act is too small. Systemic change is fractal. Everything cycles upwards. Small actions set a pattern for the whole system. Until we have some sense of how to live our solutions locally, we won't be successful at implementing a just governance system regionally, nationally, or globally. How we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. And she further writes, um, the idea of emergent strategy is that change is fractal. How we show up in our relationships and communities sets a pattern that's replicated at the societal, systemic, and global level. You see how this works in nature. The same fractal pattern in a conch shell is reflected in the tree canopy above and in the stars above that. Humans are nature, so the pattern repeats in us too. Change starts with each of us as individuals and in our small circles and communities, and inevitably shapes our institutions, governments, and culture at large. I'm thinking about the fractal nature of change a lot this week. I feel useless in the face of tragedies near and far. How do we prevent these things from happening again everywhere? We set new patterns. We look inward and around us. How can we live into the better world I imagine for us? How can we practice new ways of seeing, thinking, acting so that the larger pattern shifts? We can start here and we can start now. Um, Thank you all so much for joining this evening. For those who may be interested in really strengthening your advocacy skills, whether it's writing an op-ed or um, scheduling a lobby meeting. And I should have also mentioned that those can be done virtually. So there are several different options, but I have a Google form here. Would love for you to fill it out just so that we have a sense of some ideas of folks to follow up with, just with opportunities to engage further. So please feel free to scan that QR code. I'll also send it up in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. So thank you all again so much. We went through a few questions, but if you have any others, please feel free to email me. And I look forward to hearing from you. And That is all for me. Thank you so much for all that you are doing and for your commitment to this work.